The first knock came on a night that felt too quiet for the city I lived in. The kind of silence that makes every sound feel too close and too deliberate. I was lying in bed, barely awake, when I heard it clearly from the direction of my front door. A slow and controlled knocking that did not sound like a mistake. I stayed still, listening carefully, expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway or someone calling out. But nothing followed, and the silence that came after felt heavier than the sound itself. I told myself it had to be something from the building or a neighbor at the wrong door. And after a while I forced myself to lie back down, even though I could not shake the feeling that the knock had been meant for me. The next night it happened again, exactly the same, as if whoever was behind it had practiced the rhythm. This time I got up and walked to the door, slower than I normally would, feeling a strange tension in my chest that made each step feel unnatural. I looked through the peephole and saw an empty hallway, completely still, with no sign that anyone had been there. I opened the door immediately after, almost to prove to myself that it was real. But the corridor was silent and empty, with no sound of movement anywhere in the building. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, then closed the door and locked it, suddenly aware of how exposed it made me feel. Over the following nights, the knocking became something I expected, and that made it worse because anticipation gave it space to grow in my mind. I stopped sleeping properly and started waiting for it instead, sitting in the dark and staring at the door, trying to catch the exact moment when it would begin. Each time it came, it sounded the same, calm and measured, but something about it started to feel closer, as if the sound was no longer traveling through the hallway, but coming from the door itself. One night, I pressed my hand flat against the wood while it was happening, and for a brief moment I thought I felt something on the other side pressing back with the same rhythm. Not knocking, but matching my presence. That was the first time I tried to call for help. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, my hands slightly shaking as I held it to my ear, but there was no signal, no ringing, no sound at all. Just complete silence, as if the call never existed. I pulled the phone away and checked the screen, but it showed that the call was active, even though there was nothing on the other end. The knocking continued while I stood there, holding the phone, and I realized with growing dread that whatever was happening was not something anyone else could hear. After that, things started to change more quickly. The knocking no longer felt like it belonged to the outside of the apartment. And more than once I had the clear and undeniable impression that it was coming from somewhere inside the door, as if the boundary between the hallway and my home was no longer real. One night, instead of going straight to the door, I turned toward the window to ground myself in something normal, and I saw the empty street below, quiet and unchanged, which only made the situation feel more isolated, like my apartment had been cut off from everything else. Then came the night when the pattern broke. The knock came sooner than I expected, and that small change was enough to make everything feel unstable. I stood up immediately and walked to the door, more tense than before, and this time I forced myself to do something different. I stayed still in front of it and listened carefully, focusing on the exact direction of the sound. It did not feel like it was coming from the hallway at all. It felt like it was coming from just beyond the surface, from a place that should not exist. I leaned closer to the peephole and looked through it. Instead of the hallway, I saw darkness pressed close against the other side. And after a moment, my eyes adjusted enough to realize that something was there. Not a full face, not a clear shape, but something close enough that it should have been impossible to miss. It was standing too near the door, close enough that it filled the view in a way that made the space feel wrong. I pulled back sharply and turned around, expecting to see something behind me, but the apartment was empty, exactly as it had always been. Then the knocking started again. This time it came from behind me. The same slow, controlled rhythm, now unmistakably coming from inside my own home. I did not turn around. I could not bring myself to confirm what I was already starting to understand. Instead, I moved forward and grabbed the handle of the door. My mind focused on one thing only, which was to break whatever was happening before it could get any worse. The moment my hand touched the handle, the knocking behind me stopped instantly. leaving a silence so complete it felt unnatural. I opened the door. For a brief second, everything went dark. There was no hallway, no apartment, no sound, just a sudden absence of everything I knew. Then I was standing outside my own door. My hand was raised, frozen in the air, just inches away from knocking. I could feel the motion in my muscles, as if I had been about to do it for a long time without realizing it. The hallway around me was quiet and still, exactly as it should have been. And yet something about it felt distant, like I was no longer part of it in the same way. Slowly, without lowering my hand, I leaned closer to the door and looked into the peephole. There was an eye staring back at me, wide open, unblinking, watching me from inside. And I understood with a certainty that left no room for doubt that it had been watching me the entire time, waiting for me to take my place on the other side. More real stories on my channel.